So over to you, Cathy.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Susan, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day. What we're going to be speaking about today, as Susan alluded to, was what we're referring to as a blended approach using a cooperative model to engage various community stakeholders in the creation of high quality, not-for-profit childcare, specifically in Alberta. So my name is Cathy Edwards. I am pleased to hold the role of entrepreneur in residence with Co-Operatives First. And as we will talk about a little later on about how our initiative got started, I am pleased to be spearheading the cooperative childcare expansion. So in my role at Cooperatives First, I work with all kinds of cooperatives, both for-profit and not-for-profit, and I provide business coaching services. And as we started the childcare expansion, we really saw that there was a great need for professional supports for communities to undertake this very important task. Today, I am also joined by my colleague, Candice Minott, who is our community engagement coordinator on the project. So she deals with client relationships and management, supporting and support for childcare cooperatives. So if you choose to engage with our program, she will be your point of first contact. I want to tell you a little bit about Cooperatives First, who we are and what we do. Cooperatives First is a not-for-profit organization that is wholly funded by the cooperative retailing system and federated co-op. So we are really pleased to be able to offer all of our services, including the services under this project, free of charge. Thank you to our generous funder. So we work with communities to build sustainable cooperative businesses and enhance economic growth. And we really see childcare as an important part of this equation. This particular project is also funded by Prairies Can, as we've made an application to try and catalyze cooperative development of childcare centers across the Prairie provinces. So what we're going to touch on today is a high-level discussion, first of all, about why childcare is vital for communities. We're going to talk about the cooperative model and how what we envision fits with a community venture. We're going to talk about childcare cooperatives in particular and some of the groups that we've worked with. And then we'll outline what supports we are able to offer to communities or school boards who want to engage in this type of development. So I'm sure if you've engaged with Susan and her organizations that you understand that all of Canada has essentially been identified as a childcare desert. So back in May of 2023, there was a report put out by the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives, and it identified that 61% of children in Alberta live in a childcare desert. And if you're not familiar with that term, a desert essentially means that for every one licensed childcare space, there are at least 3 children in competition for enrollment in that space. So childcare is A, not terribly accessible. B, we've been working on the affordability piece of it. And, you know, Alberta does have a subsidized system where there is access to $10 a day if you're lucky enough to find enrollment. So I want to talk to you a bit about how this project got started. So we worked back in 2022 with a rural community called Maple Creek in Saskatchewan, and this is really the underpinnings for our project. And in that particular circumstance, it was the economic development officer who reached out to Cooperatives First and said that she was having difficulty with various local businesses and institutional employers. They had a very hard time hiring and retaining staff because of a lack of childcare in the community. So she was noticing a major impact on their economic viability due to the lack of childcare. Maple Creek was not a large community, had a total population of just under 2,100 people. and only had a handful of private or small day homes in the community. And that solution wasn't really serving the community need at large. They had enormous waiting lists, and there was no community underpinning to the offering, meaning at any point in time, those operators could decide that they no longer wanted to operate childcare out of their home, or it being a transitional business in nature. When their children age out and start school, there was a very high risk that there would be virtually no childcare in the community. So what that economic development officer had twigged into at a very early point in the game was that childcare is important to the economic viability of the community. So we had a number of statistics that supported the fact that for every $1 that a community invests in childcare, there is an economic multiplier effect that $1.38 to $2.54 in economic spinoff is created in the community. What's really interesting about this statistic is that this statistic was created before the advent of $10 a day or affordable childcare. So it begs to reason that families will have even more disposable income and a higher economic spinoff to the community. It's also well proven that childcare is strongly linked to maternal employment. So if we're talking about a labor shortage in a community, if 50% of your community has no access to childcare, then your labor force is drastically reduced. And it goes without saying that providing high quality early learning and childcare improves positive outcomes for children. So in addition to this, it was interesting. We attended the Economic Development Officers Conference, EDX, in Alberta last spring, and there was a lot of dialogue about how rural communities want to attract talent in this new work from home era. And there, with the high cost of living these days, it's very appetizing to think of rural communities as a more affordable alternative for raising your family. And we really wanted to point out that working from home or choosing to live in a rural lifestyle does not mean that you do not require childcare. So providing childcare as a part of your community landscape helps to ensure that you can attract young families, and also works as a feeder for your school system to ensure that you have a vital young support network for young families. And as we'll touch on, there is a timeline on this initiative, and that is all tied to the bilateral agreements between the provincial government and the federal government. So to circle back to Maple Creek and why childcare, why now? So as this was identified as a national problem, there are agreements between the federal government and the provincial governments to create spaces. We believe that not-for-profit childcare and early learning centers should be playing a very important role in the development of these childcare spaces. Alberta was mandated with creating over 54,000 not-for-profit childcare spaces. So our proposal to you as we roll into what this could look like using the cooperative model is to ensure that we are clear. We're not proposing the classical parent-run childcare cooperative. So often when people think of cooperatives in a childcare context, they think of a group of parents who come together to form a cooperative. And while that can still be a successful model, we see the need for childcare to be more overarching and require more community players at the table to ensure that we're providing a not-for-profit, long-term community solution. So that's where we loosely refer to it as a multi-stakeholder or blended approach to community development. So as I identified, the bilateral agreement between the Alberta government and the federal government allocated $3.8 billion to Alberta for this space creation. So we've touched on that. Currently, we are waiting with bated breath for the rollout of a new plan for Alberta to catalyze capital development, particularly in the not-for-profit umbrella. So you may have heard previously about space creation grants, which ranged between $5,000 and $6,000 for the creation of a new childcare space in the not-for-profit area. That program has currently been suspended by the provincial government. Pardon me. It's been suspended due to a high volume of intake. But what we are understanding from the provincial government is that by the end of December or early in the advent of 2025, we will have a rollout of a new program which will offer more substantial capital funding to create not-for-profit childcare spaces. So given the uptake that there has been already to the space creation funding, we know that if this is a serious consideration for your community, it is very important to mobilize now, come together and be ready for when that new program opens, because it will be competitive. And because there are more substantial capital dollars coming down the pipeline, we know that it's really important for communities to get their position in that queue to bring childcare to your community. One other element that I want to touch on that is also coming down the pipeline is a low interest or no interest program. They haven't decided exactly the nuances of how this will roll out. But back in March of 2024, the federal government earmarked $1 billion in lending for not-for-profit capital projects that will be handed out through CMHC. So the timing is absolutely imperative on this, as the bilateral agreements run until March of 2026. So timelines are very important, not only for when the CMHC program rolls out, but for when the capital funding expansion program rolls out in Alberta. So I want to talk a little bit about the cooperative model and what that means. So in very general terms, the hallmark of a cooperative is really a group of people coming together to solve a problem. And it is recognized by the democratic structure of one member, one vote. It is a legal organization, just like any other type of incorporated entity. So it is its own legal person at law. The cooperative members are the owners of the cooperative. And a community service cooperative is an excellent way or a vehicle to create a not-for-profit entity to ensure that any assets owned by the cooperative remain property of the community under the articles and bylaws of the governing structure. So that's really important, because as we see the need for childcare being a long-term community service, what we want to ensure is that communities have a hand in the creation of childcare, so that those assets and grant funding and all of the other dollars that go into creating the center are there for the community as a long-term service. So cooperatives in general are very versatile and adaptable. Members can be individuals, institutional organization, or corporations. There is transparency. Members and owners share and access to information, and it emphasizes community service over individualized profit. So I just want to touch on the flexibility on membership for a moment, and this circles back to the community of Maple Creek. So in that particular circumstance, the economic development officer had identified the issue, but knew that they did not have the bandwidth as a municipality to take on childcare as a wholly municipal endeavor. And I know in Alberta, there are a handful of communities where the municipality has taken on childcare. And I won't understate it. It's not a small task. With the model we propose, it really is signified by the saying, many hands make light work. So whether you are representing a school board or a municipality, the model we proposed is to bring together key members of the community to form a cooperative and work together to provide childcare. In Maple Creek, that structure looked like the municipality, the neighboring rural municipality, because there was a provincial park in the area, and it was very important for them to find childcare that offered really flexible and alternative hours offerings, particularly during peak seasons. They also had an institutional organization in the community that provided ECE level 1, 2, and 3 training. So they became a member of the cooperative so that connection to a future training site for their students. In addition to that, we had retired members of the community as well as parents. So it was a lovely blended approach. I will also note that some of the skills and natural things that institutions do on a regular basis are second nature to those institutions, but can really ease the burden of what can sometimes look like a strictly parent-run board. So what I'm talking about is organized meetings, good governance, taking minutes, all of those things that come very naturally to institutions or organizations. Those are some of the skills and longevity that you can bring to the childcare cooperative. So why not-for-profit? So in Alberta, there is both for-profit and not-for-profit childcare with, advantages and disadvantages under both models. What we are focusing on is the development of not-for-profit who wants to focus on serving the public interest. So not-for-profits, I want to be very clear, aren't limited to operating at cost and can realize profits. However, those profits go back into the organization, and anything generated becomes for the benefit of the community. So I also want to identify that there is a distinction between a charity and a not-for-profit, in that a charity has a legal definition under the Canada Revenue Agency. So a not-for-profit cooperative can obtain a distinction as a charitable status. It would increase your reporting requirements. Many municipalities and school boards are already registered charities. So again, this is something that might be very easy to be subsumed by this collective venture. So learnings and lessons. So as we talked about, so Maple Creek came together. We've built their cooperative entity, and they are now about to break ground. They are structured as a community service or not-for-profit cooperative. And as I mentioned, there is a cross-section of stakeholders who are members of that cooperative. We have helped a number of other groups form cooperatives. And again, it's one member, one vote, and you form the board. The membership of the cooperative then elects the board of directors. The board of directors then hires a program director who is responsible for the day-to-day operations of the childcare center. So setting up the childcare co-op is the board's responsibility with support of the membership. And the flexibility of this model allows you to serve multiple stakeholder needs. So we also talk about how building a community-based model really helps build a reflection of your particular community and the values and the uniqueness of what you want to represent in your childcare facility. So we acknowledge that undertaking childcare takes time and effort. There are a great number of regulations and standards to adhere to, but this is not a venture where you are alone. So there is support out there. So in the development of our program, where we saw the gap or the need and have been able to deliver this project through the support of Prairies Can, is that we saw a disconnect between where groups and communities were in terms of wanting childcare, wanting to access the grant funding, and wanting to, navigate the process, and where the provinces were at in terms of what they were rolling out for programs and what supports they had for communities who wanted to embark on this process. So realistically, when all of the provincial governments received the funding, they increased grant allocations, but they didn't necessarily provide augmentation to the supports and services needed to help groups get from A to B. And that's really where our program comes in. So what do you need to get started? What we always tell folks is that the most important thing you can do is develop a steering committee. Now, this steering committee may end up being the ultimate board of directors, or it may just end up being the people who get the ball rolling and a different board of directors steps in at a later point in time. It is a commitment, but it is one that is well worth the investment. I have many communities right now who we're working with, and they're lucky enough to have identified a director very early on in the process. So that director now is currently a part of the steering committee. And when we go to formalize operations, they will not be on the board of directors. They will take over as the director of the facility, and we will formulate a board of directors that is reflective of the membership. The other thing to do to get started and really drum up interest is rally the community for support. I think really engaging, particularly in Alberta, because we don't know what the funding mechanism is going to look like. Historically, in the past, you will need support, financial support from other sources other than provincial funding to have this venture be successful. So, for example, we've worked with communities who have engaged major employers, and we have structured agreements where the employers who are also needing childcare have provided capital investment for the not-for-profit childcare center, and they have the ability to secure a right of first refusal on a number of childcare spaces. So it's a really great collective approach to engage private industry to contribute to a not-for-profit entity, but it also gives them the ability to ensure that if they need those childcare spaces, they have access. In terms of what Co-Operatives First can offer, I want to let you know about our program and how we can help. So we have tailored a system to help set you up for success. So we lay the foundation for what I call getting you investment ready. And that can look like a number of different things. It helps you apply for and be ready for grant funding from the provincial government. But we also know that other financial pieces of the puzzle have to fall into place. These centers are not 100% funded by the provincial government. So that means you will need to secure outside donations as much as possible, but also secure bank financing. So our program works to try and get you ready to pursue funding in a successful way under all of those umbrellas. So part of preparing you for this financial support is to help you develop. We have a financial model that deals with your operating budget, your capital budget, your human resources budget, and then ties them all together so that you can successfully forecast and predict how your operations will look and function in your particular community. From very early stages, we take your steering committee and we move you through incorporation as the very first step in the process. So to be considered for any type of funding, you have to be a legal entity. So we move you through incorporation supports, and that includes crafting your bylaws and your articles of incorporation to be reflective of how you want your childcare center to look. Then we move through some community needs planning. So I'm sure you've heard of a community needs assessment, and I know that the provincial government in Alberta is actually looking to provide contract services for communities who are trying to determine their community needs. We also have some good tools and resources to do that. It includes doing some surveys. It includes looking at your employment landscape and long-term institutions to help you find the right fit and need for your community. But I will hearken to a colleague, Dr. Susan Prentice in Manitoba, and she refers to creating childcare spaces like putting a teaspoon in the ocean. So by and large, if you are in Canada and you're in a community, you need childcare spaces. So it's very unrealistic, I think, to think that you can overbuild unless you're in a small center and you build for 200 children. I mean, but we will help you navigate that process in terms of finding the right fit. From our perspective, it's about keeping it economically viable. So this toolkit, in addition to the economic model that I referred to, we also have a workbook. So that includes your community needs assessment, planning your preliminary policies, looking at who your board needs to encompass, and then looking at other sources of funding. I am also happy to report that we also provide a couple of other supports. One is in terms of facility planning, which can be a massive undertaking. We do know that architects and contractors really know their stuff, but what it seems to be missing is people with practical hands-on experience, folks who have actually been in a daycare center or a childcare center and really understand the inner workings for successful operations. So in each province, we have an operational expert who has been someone who has actually spent time boots in the trench, so to speak, and they help provide insights and guidance not only through the licensing process, but in actually setting up the facility so that you can understand why it's important to have your change table and hands washing station at this location as opposed to around the corner where there maybe isn't a good sight line. So we've really tried to build out as much as possible a comprehensive support system to really help you be successful. And again, all of this is offered at no cost to communities. The only catch is that it is a support system for the cooperative model. Sorry, my mouse is running out of battery. So there we are. So that is the end of our formal presentation. We have some time for questions, and I really hope we can engage with all of you. Our emails are there, Candice at Co-Operatives First or myself. If you register on our website, there is a landing page for each province that we're working in. So there is one for Alberta. And by registering on the website, you can have access to the workbook and the financial modeling tools. If you would like to apply and have us support you in your initiative from start to finish, Candice would be your first point of contact for that.
Thank you so much for that, Cathy. I'm just gonna stop